the opportunities, in this time of crisis. And it's easy to get lost in the crisis. It's easy to to drown in all of the challenges and all of that. But, look, it's a truism, and this is how, Jeff and the team marketed this. Where there's crisis, there's opportunity. And I think where there is a crisis, it opens people's minds and makes people more accepting of change.
So, good evening, everyone, and thank you for attending today's PDF webinar. My name is Radha, and I'll be the moderator for tonight's event. The topic for tonight is how to thrive in the era of rising global tensions. But before we start, I just want to give a quick introduction to PDF for those of you who might be new to us. Professional Development Forum, PDF, was established to help young professionals reach their full potential in the modern Australian workplace. We believe that everyone, not just the elite few, should have access to the knowledge, mindset, and network to develop themselves. We believe that by becoming the best versions of ourselves, we lead a happier, more fulfilling life and inspire those around us to do the same. We do this by running events that aim to inform, connect, and inspire, and share what we've learned with our community. I also want to quickly acknowledge our dedicated team of volunteers at PDF who are here with us tonight. Thank you very much for everything you do. And before we begin, I'd like to lay down some housekeeping rules. Please note, this is a recorded session that may be distributed to social media at a future date. And also, I'd like to invite everyone to update your names and turn your cameras on so we can better connect with you. And finally, if you have any questions during the talk, please feel welcome to type them into the chat box at any time. When we get into the Q&A part of the session, we will invite you to ask your questions. We will aim to finish by 7 p.m. Tonight, we're lucky to have with us Jason Yat-Sen Li as our special guest. He will share with us his views on the impacts and challenges that difficult times will have on Australia and how we can make the most of these uncertain times. A little bit about Jason. Jason currently is the chairman of the investment group Vantage Asia and managing director of the corporate advisory firm YSA. YSA specializes in complex cross-border China-related merger and acquisitions and capital raising mandates. He's a fellow of the University of Sydney Senate, a young global leader of the World Economic Forum, and a member of the World Economic Forum's Global Agenda Council in China. He was previously a non-executive director of the George Institute for Global Health, vice chair of the Australia-China Chamber of Commerce, director of the Sydney Institute, and a governor member of the Smith family. Jason worked on road safety in China, won the China PR Association Silver Medal for Best Campaign in 2005. With a master's in law, Jason has also worked as a commercial lawyer for Coase Chambers, Westgarth in Sydney, and Davis Pollock and Wardwell in New York. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to Jason.
Thank you, Radha. Wow, you got the full long version of my CV. Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you to Jeff and the PDF team for inviting me to talk to you guys today. I'm beaming from you guys from my home, but I also wanted to acknowledge the traditional owners and where I'm beaming to you guys from. I'm in sort of Cremorne, so this is sort of the Camaragal sort of traditional lands, and I acknowledge their leaders, past, present, and emerging. So guys, Jeff picked this topic for me, but I liked it, and it's a pretty broad sort of topic. So what I thought we'd do is, why don't I sort of talk a bit, not for too long, maybe 5-10 minutes, and then Radha and I will have a bit of a conversation, and then want to leave plenty of time for Q&A. So maybe to start, often people go conceptual, and then they bring the conceptual down to sort of the nitty gritty or real life sort of stuff. So I think I might turn it around and just start by giving you guys a flavor of this sort of stuff that I've been dealing with day to day. And not to say the stuff that I've been dealing with is any more tricky or difficult or whatever than what you guys are dealing with, but I just want to sort of give a flavor of sort of the day-to-day stuff that I've been doing, and then parlay that into a bunch of bigger themes. Firstly, as Rada said, I'm on the Senate, which is basically the board of directors at the University of Sydney. And the university sector as a whole has been really badly impacted by this crisis at so many different levels. As you know, because the campuses were essentially shut down, there was no teaching or no face-to-face teaching that was possible. And you know, Luke, you and I had a quick chat about that at the beginning, right? So basically, we did have plans to put lessons online. There were sort of vague strategies and plans that were a rough estimate about 3 years in time frame and rolling it out. And basically, we rolled out 3 years worth of planning across the entire institution in about 3 weeks, which was just an unbelievable sort of achievement by all of the staff and the academics and the management at the university. Nobody really thought it was possible, but when faced with that challenge, everybody just did it, which was terrific. Now we're planning for the return to campus. So second semester, apart from the really big lectures, second semester is going to be largely back to face-to-face teaching. And you can imagine the sort of challenges and the sort of questions, the sort of risks and the sort of planning that's going on, around that. There's a lot of stuff around safety. There's all of the logistical nitty-gritty stuff. But at the same time, there've been all of these really big, interesting questions about tertiary education and the intersection with digital and what it means. So, we've been asking questions about, well, should we go back to normal? What should go back to face-to-face, and what is actually better or works quite well online? Or how do we blend this stuff together? We've been asking about a whole bunch of questions around what is a university and what's the purpose of a university? And one of the big challenges of COVID-19 is when you take away personal interaction, right? When a university is no longer a place where you come and you interact with all of your peers and all of your fellow students, and the people aspect isn't there, then, what does it become? And connected to that was this question of place. Certainly for the University of Sydney, where it's located, the sandstone buildings, what used to be the jacaranda tree, in the quad, there's such a powerful sense of place around the campus, and when people come and they interact with their peers and it's a place of learning. But when everything's online and everything's digital and you lose that, in some ways that sense of place, then again, well, what is a university, and what's its purpose? So we've been sort of asking ourselves, a range of these questions and thinking through, all right, well, when do things go back to normal? And to what extent should they go back to normal? To what extent should we go back to the way they are? Or is this actually an opportunity to do things totally differently? Now, the biggest challenge I think we face is the loss of the international student revenue. And you guys have no doubt read all about that. And I don't think the University of Sydney is any different from, UTS, where Sam goes, or other universities. Literally about a third of our revenue comes from international students, approaching, almost 40 to 50% of our student body are international students. And there's various arguments about whether, why that happened. Is there an over-concentration or over-reliance on international students? And essentially it happened because of the falling amount of government investment in the tertiary sector. And so when that happens, you can either do a few things. You can either sort of cut back your courses and your research, or you can increase domestic student fees, or, the government just has to fund more. So universities, in a way, were forced to find alternative sources of revenue, in particular to support research, and found a very big and willing market in Chinese international students in particular, and grabbed that market. Maybe there are sort of legitimate criticisms that, you know, we grabbed that market too much and didn't sufficiently diversify to other markets. And, you know, I think some of those sort of comments are fair. So, you know, that's one of the really big things that I've been involved with at the university. We're investors, and we have a big investment in a student accommodation business. And that's been just a disaster, so difficult over the last sort of 6 months, together with the plight of so many international students. There's probably a bunch of you guys that are international students as well, and across so many different levels, you know, financially, in terms of mental health. And coming to campus where if you've just arrived from overseas, you don't have any friends, you're away from your family and your support network, and then you're locked down and you have to do all your classes online. Just an incredibly difficult time. And so we've been thinking across both the university and some of our other businesses about how do we support international students better and just, you know, create a better experience. The third thing that I wanted to talk to you guys about around my day-to-day is we noticed from about March and April a really strong uptick in racial abuse against Asian people, or, you know, Asian-looking people here in Australia. And it was sort of bubbling up. We're hearing all these stories from the community and from our friends, and we decided that, look, this wasn't an isolated thing and that we really had to do something about it. And so, you know, together with about 20 other sort of compatriots, we started this thing called the Unity Over Fear campaign. We got sort of 20 other sort of Chinese Australians with a bit of a profile. We wrote an open letter and we started an online petition. And I think that online petition has about 120,000 signatures on it now. It traveled very, very well in terms of raising awareness around racism, and, you know, just the fear and anxiety that was in the community that COVID caused, and this rhetoric, I guess, about COVID being a China virus and all of the political tensions, you know, that were going on, really, I think, resulted in this sort of fearful response against people who look Chinese. And that was a really tough time for the community. There were lots of friends of mine who were Chinese Australians or Asian Australians. They were born here. A lot of them hadn't experienced a lot of racism in their lives. And then all of a sudden, just like going shopping or going for runs and things like that, were sort of abused because of the way that they looked. And it really shook them to the core. And so we thought it was just so important that we sort of ran this campaign. So you can see from, I guess, that sort of intro that, I guess, what I do in my day-to-day is not one kind of thing. You know, there's the work that I do to earn a living, you know, to provide. There's the work that I do around institutions that I support, you know, such as the university, that I think does such meaningful and important work around education and research for young people and for the future of the country. But there's also political stuff that I do as well. It may not be party political stuff, but it's social political stuff. It's taking a stand on issues that matter to me and where I think things need to change, or opinions need to change. Let's sort of segue really quickly now into, I guess, the next sort of big theme that I just wanted to talk quickly to you guys about, and that is this, what I think is one of the most challenging issues that Australia and the world has to face over the next decade. And that is this strategic rivalry between the two superpowers now, between the United States and China. And I think that it's in a particularly bad place at the moment, and it's likely, no matter who wins the US presidential election in November, I think it's going to get worse moving forward. It's not just a trade war. It's not even just a technology war. It's a deep sort of ideological clash, and it's a deep geopolitical strategic competition for influence and power. And the risk that we have, I think, as Australia, is that we kind of get crunched in the middle of this. But that's just Australia. There are much bigger risks around the world. And when, I don't know if you guys feel the same, but when you read the media sort of on it, and some of the responses about upgrading our military sort of capabilities, about having to, stand up to China or decouple from China, I'm concerned that people haven't really thought through just what are the consequences of this. And there's two things I'd like to say here. The first is that whether we think that this has been a good thing or not, Australia's economic prosperity at the moment and for the foreseeable future is very, very much tied to China. And you can't, to my mind, separate sovereignty from economics, because if our economy goes completely pear-shaped, right, that's going to have a really big impact on our sovereignty, right? We can afford to upgrade our defense spending. We can afford to buy, all the new missiles that we're due to buy, because we have the money to do so. And we have the money to do so because over the last 20, 30 years, we've had a very, very profitable trading relationship with China. And we fight politically over, budgets for various departments, government spending for universities and schools, government spending for healthcare. We rejected the Labor Party, Bill Shorten's platform at the last election recently because we disagreed with a lot of the policies around winding back negative gearing and franking credits for older people. But when we put that up against the size of the trading relationship with China, which is some $300 billion, and the surplus, the money that we make from trading with China, in 2019, we made about $70 billion in profit from our trade with China. When we put that into context, you realize that if we're smart about it, this notion that we should just decouple from China is really not in our national interest. Now, that's not to say that we shouldn't stand up to China. China does some bad stuff, out there, and does stuff that is, we find, confronting or contradictory to our values. Not to say that we should roll over and we shouldn't stick up for our values. But my view is that this notion of having no engagement and no relationship with China is very dangerous and counterproductive. And where it is the most dangerous is we have to remember that the primary purpose of international relations and foreign policy is to prevent war. And it's something that we're lucky, those of us that are young, right? We've never had to experience this. And, a lot of you guys are quite young, but I remember when through the 70s and 80s, that was still coming to the end of the Cold War. But I do remember back then, the threat of a nuclear war always hung over our heads. And it was after the Cold War when, all of a sudden that sort of disappeared and everybody breathed this great sigh of relief. But the really worrying thing is if there is some sort of military conflict between the United States and China, and I think we are closer to that than at any point we have been for decades. The really scary thing is nobody really knows where the nuclear threshold is. Nobody really knows where things will escalate to a point where somebody will start thinking about the use of nuclear weapons. The nuclear threshold during the Cold War was very, very low, but at least people knew where it was, right? The really scary thing now is because we haven't really thought about this scenario for such a long time, if there is serious military conflict between the United States and China, nobody really knows where that nuclear threshold is. And I find that just a completely frightening thing. So I think when we read all of the media reports and all of the rhetoric around, China and the US and all this, we have to remember the primary goal that all of us should be working towards is to preserve international peace and security. And off the back of all of that, maybe do something about solving the really big global challenges that we have that take cooperation, like climate change, like global pandemic, like global poverty, like resource scarcity, all of these things that not one country can solve. The last piece that I'll sort of talk about in my intro is, I guess, the opportunities, you know, in this time of crisis. And it's easy to get lost in the crisis. It's easy to sort of to drown in all of the challenges and all of that. But, you know, look, it's a truism. And this is how, you know, Jeff and the team marketed this, you know, where there's crisis, there's opportunity. And I think where there is a crisis, it opens people's minds and makes people more accepting of change. Now, you guys have probably noticed this already, but when we think about where are the opportunities that come out of this really challenging time at the moment, I think there are probably three, sort of off the top of my head. One is around digitization, right? That's nothing new. You guys would know that. You see it. You guys are young. This is very much part of your worlds. But I'm sure that when you guys look at the world and look at industry and look at the way things work, there are all these sectors that still exist in the dark ages that are completely not digital. You know, my sister's a doctor and my brother-in-law, her husband, is a pharmacist. This whole notion of getting paper scripts and then taking them to a pharmacist to get prescription medicine and then having to take that home, that is ripe for change and reform. When you think about the way the legal industry works, you know, still so sort of stuck in the dark ages. And the insurance industry, again, there's been a lot of talk around fintech, etc. I think that one of the really big new areas of opportunity is going to be around big data and insurance. And the reason why that is because if you've got a car, for instance, and it sits in the garage and you never drive it, right? You pay pretty much the same premium as somebody who drives their car every day. And that's just the way insurance works, because it aggregates people, makes an assessment about your risk, prices that risk, and then charges you a premium. But now with the technology that exists today, there's the opportunity for insurance pricing to be completely personalized, to the point where with GPS, what you pay for your car insurance, I think one day is going to be based on the routes that you drive, how quickly you drive, how frequently you drive, as well as, you know, what sort of a driver you are. So that's digitization. The second area of opportunity, I think, is around this big theme. And again, you guys would have seen this tension between cooperation and nativism, right? So during the crisis, we saw, on the one hand, some cooperation. You know, there was the national cabinet, you know, the unions and the business leaders got together and they agreed on JobKeeper. There's been a certain amount of collaboration. You know, countries around the world are collaborating a lot on a vaccine. There is a certain amount of collaboration, but, you know, Independence Day and all those movies about, you know, if we're facing an alien invasion and how all the countries of the world are going to work together to fight the enemy. Well, we were facing an enemy, a really big enemy that threatened to wipe out, you know, humankind. And when you look at how the countries of the world reacted, how the United States reacted, how China reacted, how all of us reacted, I've got to say, it wasn't Independence Day. Well, it was kind of Independence Day in the sense that it was kind of everybody for themselves. And when you look at how our states, what's going on now with these border closures, and in Queensland about how, you know, there was the mother who was separated from her baby child who had to go into hospital and couldn't see her, and almost there were 2 incidents here and she almost lost her child. I mean, this sort of stuff where people are sort of retreating back into their own sort of castles. This tension between cooperation and nativism, I think, as a theme, is very, very interesting. And so to think about, well, what is the opportunity around that? And what are the opportunities around cooperation and building back community um, into our societies? The last thing I'd say is, or the theme that I want to talk about is where I started, basically, which is around sort of reform, recovery and reform. And this is the closing remark that I'd make. I hope we don't bounce back to the way things were before, because there was a lot of stuff that was really profoundly wrong, even before the pandemic hit. You know, we had massive inequality. Our economy wasn't working well at all, in spite of what people would say. We had huge levels of wage stagnation. It was falling growth and productivity, historic lows. Economy just wasn't working for people as it should, which allowed demagogues like the Donald Trumps of the world to put out these massively powerful, but I think deceptive political platforms, which are extremely effective in winning power. So my closing point, and I guess the biggest opportunity I think out of all of this is, how do we not bounce back to where things were? And how do we take this whole time, this whole experience as a burning platform for reform? And the lens through which we can look at things is to ask, well, what are the problems that we need to solve? And how do we turn the solutions to those problems into the opportunities through which we view the world? That's all I had as an intro. I probably went on for a bit long, but yeah, happy to sort of have a discussion or talk about any of those things.
Mm-hmm. So first of all, before I start my conversation with you, I'd like to bring a few questions up from my audience to you. So Robert Dang in the group chat said, digital transformation is happening across most industries, and in education, remote learning and recorded tutorials are becoming commonplace. Surely we can diversify and service other nations besides China. Do you have a view on if we could achieve this?
Yeah, no, certainly. I think certainly at a university level, and it's not just universities, I think it's businesses all over the place have awoken to the concentration risk now. And we're vulnerable. You know, the Chinese government announced they were going to launch this inquiry into Australian wine sort of now. And look, it's left us very vulnerable. And so I think any smart organization is beginning to think about how does it diversify its customer base. And that's not being anti-China, that's just smart, that's just good business. The issue though is, and I think this escapes a lot of people, it's not going to be that fast. You can't just sort of go, okay, well, let's diversify, and then all of a sudden overnight, find other markets and other customers, the size and with pockets as deep and with the level of engagement that China has with us at the moment. The size of the Australia-China trading relationship dwarfs. It's bigger, significantly bigger than the next three trading relationships, which is Japan, the United States, and I think it's the EU after that. So yes, we should diversify, but we have to be realistic. It's not going to happen overnight. I think this diversification will take 5 to 10 years at the very least. And in the meantime, I don't think it's in our national interest to trash our relationship with China in the meantime.
Thank you. Robert, would you like to further ask your question? Your second question?
Thanks for your time tonight, Jason. I remember watching you as a kid many years ago around the debate for whether Australia should become a republic or not.
Yeah,
so, yeah.
20 years.
Yeah, that's showing my age. The second question I had was again around China and whether you think that Australia could demonstrate more regional leadership and be firm with China, but still be an ally or a friend and not harm that trade relations. Because at the moment on the international stage, it doesn't seem that China has many allies. There may be North Korea and there may be Russia, but to the west, they've recently pissed off India with the border situation. So, I think that there's opportunity there, but I'd like to hear your view on it.
It's a great question, Robert. My view around this is that I think both superpowers have been a bit disappointing in all of this. And I think there's an opportunity for middle powers like Australia, but not just us alone, right? There's a whole host of middle powers for whom we have common values and common interests. Like we're not the only ones that are kind of stuck a bit in the middle of this sort of US-China conflict. Singapore's stuck in the middle, Malaysia's stuck in the middle, the UK's stuck in the middle, Canada's stuck in the middle. There are a lot of other countries that are stuck in the middle, right? And I think that there is a big opportunity for middle powers to start stepping up and to start showing the type of leadership that the superpowers haven't so far been able to show around a lot of the really big global challenges around, such as climate, such as global pandemics. And I suspect we're going to see a new sort of era of this kind of middle power multilateralism. These sorts of groupings, they might be opportunistic or they might be more organized, but I kind of see if we go out ourselves, like we have, and just sort of start attacking China or criticizing China, I'm just not sure that's the smartest way to go about it. But if we are part of a group of middle powers for whom we share a certain set of values, and then together we say, look, this is not about being anti-China, but these are certain principles and values that we think are very, very important. I think it's going to be a lot more effective and make us a lot less vulnerable. But coming back to what I said earlier on, we have to be focused on what do we really want to achieve. And the goal of countries like Australia, first and foremost, in terms of the US and China, is not, it's such a stupid way to put things. Do we choose between Australia and China? It's such an unproductive way to frame the question. The question should be framed as, how does Australia play a meaningful role in fostering a new sort of strategic equilibrium? How do we help the US and China get on with each other to a point where it doesn't become a threat to global peace and security? And that's at the base level. At a bigger level than that is, how do we help them cooperate to solve some of the bigger challenges? But again, it's not just us. I think other middle powers have a role to play in that too.
Cool, thank you.
Awesome. I hope that answered your question. Jeffrey has a question. Jeffrey, would you like to tell the group?
Okay, I'm just picking up a point where Jason was saying that our movie was we're nothing like Independence Day. In fact, it's been disappointing watching how the nations behave. I wonder, just in relation to the lack of global cooperation, how much of it really is just the media. And as you know, the state of the media today, it's all about clickbait and rage baits and whatever it is to make you engage with them. How much of that is the media magnifying the division, and how much of it is actual, root tribalism? What do you think the real situation is?
I think it's a bit of both, but I do think that there is genuine tribalism out there. If you look at, just what's been happening with the Australian government, our own government, it's not a media beat up that our trade minister or any senior government minister can't get a meeting. The Chinese leadership won't take our phone calls. That is not made up. That is real. Similarly, the border strikes and the border sort of debacles that are going on, all of this stuff is real, and certainly from inside of China, just the growing concern around Australia and how Australia behaves towards China amongst the Chinese population. I think that is real as well. But all of that said, it takes time to really unwind the people-to-people links. They're still very, very strong between businesses, between organizations. And that's why countries are still, there's a lot of collaboration between US scientists, Chinese scientists, Australian scientists, across all different fields, not just COVID-19. And those research links and those collaborations, there's still military collaborations that go on. The military still talk. At the lower levels, people are still talking. The really dangerous thing, and it's something that I think everybody has to work to prevent, is the slow unraveling and the unwinding of those relationships. And that's the really scary thing about this talk about decoupling, right? So what's happening out of Trump's America, now, the unwinding and the decoupling of supply chains, the winding back and the unraveling of alliances, of partnerships, this bifurcation of the world, I think is just doing tremendous damage to decades and decades of engagement and rapprochement. And I think it's something that all of us as professionals and people out there need to work to prevent.
Jeffrey, would you like to make any other additional comments, or are you happy for us to move on?
Oh, I'm pretty happy with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Sean also had another point he would like to add, he would like to share with us.
Hi, Jason. Can you hear me, by the way?
Sean.
Cool. I've just got a question, just to bring it back to a professional development point of view. I was just wondering, in terms of your cross-border experiences in Asia, specifically China, do you have any advice for young professionals looking to do something similar in this day and age of, anti-globalization and political tensions?
Yeah, great question, Sean. My main piece of advice is, something my dad said to me when I was a lot younger than I am now. He said, Jason, before you turn 30, don't think about settling down. Just go out there, live in as many places, have as many experiences as possible. Then after you turn sort of 30, think about getting your shit together. And I think talking to you guys as young Australians, and given where we are in the world, is, we're geographically quite far away from a lot of places. We're an island. I tend to think that our media and our public discourse tends to be a little bit sort of, remote and disconnected with the rest of the world. So important that you guys get out there and live and work in other places. And then one day, hopefully, you'll bring that stuff back here and enrich our society and our country with it. Because the most dangerous thing that we have as a country, I think, is to let our horizons sort of come in on us and to sort of fall for that sort of parochial sort of thinking. So absolutely, Sean. I mean, regardless of the geopolitical tensions between US, China, Australia, China, there's still a huge expat community in China, and they live there every day, and they do great work, and they love it there. But there's also, opportunity in the geopolitical tension and the diversification away from China. I think what it means is, across Asia, the ASEAN markets, the ASEAN countries, the ASEAN economies are going to be more and more prominent. And there's going to be, because of the lack of focus, I think ASEAN expertise and ASEAN experience, relationships, languages, all of this will be in very big demand in Australia. If you wanted to open the market or do investments in Vietnam, in Indonesia, the level of understanding and the level of expertise, I think, in corporate Australia around those markets is very, very low, very, very low. And so to be able to build capability in those areas, I think will be, enormously valuable. And there's no better way to build the capability than to go and move there, live there. There's so much activity in those markets, whatever your field of endeavor. So I'd really, when they open the borders again, which I hope is going to be soon, really encourage all of you guys to get out there and live in the region and work in the region.
Cool. Thanks for the answer. I just wanted to add that, just given the amount of Asian Australians with, bilingual capabilities, cross-cultural skills that, that we utilize these advantages.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And just the knowledge within our diaspora communities as well.
Definitely.
Awesome. Thank you, Sean. Teresa, Lim, would you like to join the conversation as well?
Yep. Hi, Jason. I actually loved your answer just now because the Singapore government has been, for about a good 18 months, offered Singaporean companies subsidies to put university students in ASEAN countries to, have them scale up and also allow a more affordable talent pool to speed up their expansion regionally. So I hope the Australian government does something similar. But that's just a comment, not a question. So my question is actually about university education. And what's your view on the repricing of uni courses? Do you think it's short-sighted and not aligned with the underlying skills and capabilities that we need for the future?
Yeah, I don't really like it, the changes. I kind of get where they're trying to go, with it, but I think it is short-sighted because there's a bunch of perverse incentives, number one, and I think, there's a bunch of analyses sort of out there about that. But I think fundamentally for students now, how do you feel if you're studying for an arts degree now and you're told by the government that your degree is worth less than somebody who's, studying for a STEM degree? How does it make you feel that, your chosen career or your chosen course of study is, worth less than somebody else's? I don't think that's the right sort of messages are appropriate for students as they start their sort of studies or start their careers. And it brings me back to sort of the first lecture I had when I was a law student, and we wandered into this sort of hall, and the lecturer basically said, what you'll learn in your university is, you guys have probably had similar sort of things when you guys went to uni, but this lecturer said, what you guys will learn over the next sort of few years in your law degrees, you won't remember any of it, any of the detail. It'll all go in one year and out the other, and it's all going to be irrelevant anyway. But what we seek to teach you as a university, or the purpose of your university education, is to question what's going on out there, to take a critical mind to the society or to the government as you see it, and to be able to think critically about what's wrong with it and how to make it better. And that, to me, is the most fundamental thing about a tertiary and international education. And it worries me that if there is any hint that, a government wants to stymie that sort of independent, critical thinking around the institutions of society, I think that is that's really diminishing to our democracy.
That's a great answer. I think also the announcement today of Google's announcement today of three roles that are 6-month courses that they're offering also sends a very strong signal to the STEM courses out there that a 3-year degree is no longer necessarily safe either.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there's a lot of really interesting work that, our institution, and I'm sure most other institutions, are doing around, traditionally you think of your relationship with the university as, it's something you do in your 20s, you graduate, and then it becomes, your alma mater. That's you're an alum. There's a lot of thinking now about how because of the changing nature of work and because knowledge and skills that they become outdated so quickly, around this notion that maybe you never graduate, or you have this continuing lifelong relationship with your university where, yeah, you graduate, but then you keep your student ID, you keep your student number, and at any time you might pay an annual fee or something that's connected to your alumni association, but at any time you have access to all of the courses that the university offers online. You still have access to the library, and then you can dip in and dip out again when you want to refresh your skills. And so there's a lot of thinking around this sort of lifelong learning, a lifelong relationship with the university, around micro-credentialing. There's a lot of this stuff that hopefully we'll see sort of rolled out soon. But one last point about, universities. In this sort of Trump kind of world, this sort of post-truth, post-fact kind of world where, so much of what comes out of, leaders and sort of mouths and voices is rubbish and just factually, off the planet. I think that there is a really important role for universities to play as, I won't say arbiters of truth, but at least of arbiters of fact. Because if the media is no longer playing that role as an arbiter of fact, then who does? And if you don't have an arbiter of fact in a society, then it's a free-for-all. It becomes impossible to function as a democracy because it's a free-for-all. And so in some ways, I'm kind of thinking of the tertiary sector in universities or the academy as almost a fourth pillar of democracy, to basically be able to be an arbiter of fact and to be a champion of science in public debate, evidence-based science and knowledge in public debate.
Thank you. That's great.
Thank you, Teresa. And since we are almost out of time, but we still have a few questions more, hopefully we can quickly run through them. So Washington, would you like to share your question with the group?
Yes. Are you guys able to hear me? I hope
Yeah.
so.
Hey, Washington,
Okay.
yes, we can.
Finally.
Hi, Jason. It's really good for me to see that we still have intellectuals up there that still able to think straight. I was really pleased to hear that your points. I think is very interesting. I have a lot of questions to ask, but I go straight to the point in one here because I have lost faith in politics, so I don't want to go down that path. At least not yet. But you mentioned about technological innovations. And then as a technologist, I think Australia has a lot of potential. There's so many things we could do. We could create a whole entirely new industry. And because it's a small population, it can be a really good place to prototype different ideas and test it out. And then once we it's proof of concept, we could take it out there in the world and make big time of change society for the better, I think. But I feel like there's not much appetite, like the leadership does not see their way. So my question for you is, what is your take on the big picture? I mean, how you see things from above?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Washington, and it's something I struggle with all the time. I have a love-hate relationship with politics. I've been kind of in and out of politics for the last sort of 30 years, and sometimes I hate it and I go, oh my God, why do I put myself through this stuff? But it keeps dragging me back. And the reason why it keeps dragging me back is because it is important. And it's important for a number of reasons. It's important more than just because you actually make the decisions that change people's lives and you can change a country, all that sort of stuff. But I think there's another reason why it's really important, and that's around the symbolic, or this, how do I put this? It's the power of leadership in the minds of the younger generation, in the minds of a population. And if you have good leadership and strong political leadership, you can inspire a generation of young people. And that's the bit that keeps me there, keeps me interested. It makes it worth it, you know. You know, just talking to you guys, you know, tonight, and you know, talking at things like this, seeing people like, you know, Jeff and Rada, and you know, you guys wanting to make a difference, and it's so inspiring. And this is where politics matters. And if we can get it right, and I think that there is one, so to your question, what's the big picture? I think it's this, and I said this, I was speaking at the ALPs, they had this big fundraising event in Sydney just before everything went pear-shaped, sort of like 2 nights before the election. I sort of said something a little bit controversial that night. I said, look, you know, our task is not even so much about winning the next election, right? The biggest task that we have is how do we rebuild the trust that people have in politics and politicians, right? Because if we can actually do that, if we can rebuild that trust that people have, then everything else is going to follow from that. The election victories, real progress, reform, everything's going to follow from that. And in some ways, it brings us all the way back to the beginning of where we started from. We have to be able to use this crisis as an opportunity for reform. Otherwise, you know, we would have wasted this crisis. If we can't achieve reform off the back of everything that's going on now, then holy smokes, we are really in trouble.
Thank you. I think, like, you know, there's a lot of things we can do, and hopefully we can, you know, make a difference.
I encourage you, listen to, I was driving back home on my way to this presentation. I was just listening to Obama's speech. Listen to his speech. It's a ripper.
I mean, I miss that kind of leadership, to be honest. You know, at least that there was reason behind the words.
Yeah, it sure is.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you, Washington. And it was good to finally hear you, and welcome to the team again, once again.
Thank you.
I'll ask one final question, and that'll be the closing for tonight. And that question was from Patrick. So the question is, with the current government's reaction to the trade wars, how do you think it will impact our economy, and what would your suggesting be in regards to improving the current situation? If you were part of the government, what would your advice be to them?
I assume we're meaning the you know, the trade wars with, you know, China and America and everything like that. I think there's a number of things here. I think number one, I think we need to first and foremost, we need to be pragmatic and smart about and balanced in our relationship with China overall. I put it, you know, it's a simplistic framework, but I talk about good China, bad China. Yep. Yes, there is bad China. We have to acknowledge that. You know? But we also have to acknowledge China's not Darth Vader. Like, it's not Emperor Palpatine. It's not like the epitome of evil, right? No, you know, no complex sort of system or organization is one or the other. Similarly, there's no country in the world that's like all 100% good as well. There's good and bad to everything. You know, there's good Australia and there's bad Australia, right? There's good United States and there's bad United States. We have to be able to see both sides. And so we have to be able to stand up and push back against bad China, but we also have to be able to double down and work with good China, because it's in our interest and it's in the world's interest to do so. So that's at a theoretical level. I also think it's really important that we begin to be able to talk to regular Australian people and voters about these sorts of concepts, to elevate the discussion from being just black and white, because it's such an important issue. It's important for the world. It's also important for Australia economically and also socially. So if we think about the distrust, say this continues and the trade war turns into a technology war, and then it turns into something like a Cold War, what does that do for people who look and have a surname like Jeff, right? When, or me, or anybody with an Asian background or with a Chinese cultural background, when we try to get a promotion, when we try to get a job with the government, when we try to work for the Department of Defense, or try to get a scholarship or engage in research in an area that could have some sensitivity as a military application. And what happens if this distrust all of a sudden means that the government or big organizations or the general population go, you know what, Jeff Wang, ooh, that surname, background, you know, is that, you know, can we trust him? How do we know that if we share our research with him and share our company secrets with him and share our intellectual property with him, he's not going to, you know, slip it off to the Chinese Communist Party? That sort of stuff, that sort of thinking, I think, is so much more a threat to our democracy. When we start distrusting our own citizens, that is so much more a threat to our democracy than the Chinese Communist Party could ever be.
Thank you so much, Leighton. You've learned so much from you. That was such a powerful discussion. We didn't have time to have a discussion, but definitely the questions made up for it. So thank you for everyone. So thank you, Jason, once again. And I'm sure everyone got something helpful and useful from this session. I'd also like to thank everyone for attending the event and for all the questions that poured through. They were very, very high quality and very educative. If you want to know more about our upcoming events, please visit us on Facebook and LinkedIn, where you can also subscribe to our mailing list. You can also visit us on our website at www.professionaldevelopmentforum.org. Our next topic, that will be the why and how of optimism, and will take place at 7 p.m. on Thursday, the 27th of August. Once again, thank you very much to everyone for attending this event. We hope to see you soon again at our next event. Have a wonderful evening.